The decision that wasn't mine. I came home expecting a peaceful evening, just a quiet night to unwind. But nothing about my day had hinted that my entire world was about to shift. The moment I stepped through the door, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Something was off. My wife sat on the couch, her face glowing with an excitement I hadn't seen in a long time. There was an anticipation in her eyes, an energy that felt almost out of place. Before I could even take off my jacket, she spoke. "I've decided to be a surrogate for my best friend. I'm going to carry her baby." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. My mind scrambled to process what she had just said. She spoke so casually, as if she were telling me she'd picked up groceries on her way home. But this wasn't some minor detail in our day. This wasn't something you just drop into a conversation without warning. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh, waiting for her to clarify. Maybe it was just an idea she was still considering. Maybe even a hypothetical. But she wasn't joking. Her gaze locked onto mine, unwavering. "You what?" I finally managed to ask. "I'm going to carry a baby for her," she repeated, her tone steady. "She and her husband have been struggling for years. I can do this for her, and I will. It's my body, my choice." The way she said it, like it was already decided, hit me harder than the words themselves. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't her asking for my input. She was telling me what was going to happen. 100 questions raced through my mind, but the first one that slipped out was, "When were you planning to talk to me about this?" She rolled her eyes as if I was overreacting. "I'm talking to you now." "No," I snapped. "You're telling me now." She sighed, her expression unreadable, like she had already rehearsed this conversation in her head and decided that I was the unreasonable one. "I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this," she said. "This is my body, my decision. I'm doing something good, something selfless." My stomach twisted. "You don't see how this affects both of us?" "Of course I do," she replied, but her voice lacked sincerity. "But it's not like I'm cheating on you. I'm just carrying a baby for someone who can't." She said it like it was simple, like it wouldn't change anything, like it wouldn't impact us. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You're telling me that for nearly a year you'll go through pregnancy, hormonal changes, doctor visits, everything that comes with it, and I'm just supposed to be okay with that? What about our life? What about us?" She waved a hand dismissively. "It's temporary. Nothing will change between us." I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman I married, the one who used to talk things through with me before making life-altering decisions. But all I saw was someone who had already moved past this conversation before I even stepped through the door. "I should have at least been part of this decision," I said, my voice tight with frustration. She shook her head, her expression hardening. "This isn't about you." And that was it. That was the moment I realized just how little my opinion mattered in this marriage. This wasn't a partnership anymore. She had made her choice, and she expected me to fall in line. I didn't say another word. I just stood there, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. She had made up her mind, and now I had to make mine. I sat down, trying to gather my thoughts, but she was already moving on, acting as if the conversation was finished. She grabbed her phone and started typing, probably texting her friend to confirm that everything was set, like I wasn't even part of the equation. A decision that wasn't ours. I forced myself to speak, pushing past the frustration tightening in my chest. "You can't seriously expect me to be okay with this." She sighed, setting her phone down with an exasperated look. "What do you want me to say? I've already made my decision." "That's the problem." I shot back. "You made a decision alone. Do you really not see why that's an issue?" She crossed her arms and leaned back against the couch, her expression unreadable. "I see that you're overreacting," she said flatly. "This is my body, and I have every right to do what I want with it. I don't need your permission." It felt like I was talking to a brick wall. I wasn't trying to control her or make choices for her. I just wanted to be included, to have my feelings acknowledged. But every time I tried to express that, she shut me down, deflecting any real discussion. You're acting like I'm trying to control you, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. That's not what this is about. This is about us, our marriage, and how this will impact both of our lives. She scoffed. It's 9 months. A year at most if you count recovery. You're acting like I'm leaving you or something. My jaw tightened as my patience wore thin. You're carrying a child for someone else. Do you even understand what that means? The physical toll? The emotional toll? She cut me off. I've already thought about it. I nearly laughed. Maybe she had thought about it. But had she truly considered the reality of what this would do to us? To our home? The stress, the complications? I doubted it. So that's it. I asked, my voice low now, drained. I just have to accept this? She didn't hesitate. Yes. One word. A final, unwavering answer. I let it sink in. She had never asked for my opinion because she never intended to hear it. Her mind had been made up long before this conversation, and my feelings were irrelevant. This wasn't just about surrogacy anymore. It was about our marriage, what it had become, a relationship where she made the big decisions and expected me to adjust. You're really not going to consider how I feel? I asked, hoping, begging, for some sign of hesitation, some trace of the woman who once cared about what we built together. Instead, she rolled her eyes. I am considering how you feel, she said. But at the end of the day, this is my choice. I don't need your approval. She said it as if the conversation was finished, as if I should just move on. I sat there, watching her, realizing that everything had already changed. Not because of the surrogacy itself, but because of what it represented. The way she dismissed me, the way she treated our marriage as if it were hers alone to dictate. She had made her choice. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I needed to make mine, drifting apart. Days passed, but the conversation lingered in my mind, replaying over and over. I kept waiting for her to bring it up again, to acknowledge how much this was affecting me, maybe even reconsider, not necessarily her decision, but at least the way she went about it. But she never did. In her mind, everything was settled. I was just supposed to accept it. At first, I tried. I told myself I was overreacting, that with time, I'd learn to adjust. But the more I tried to bury my feelings, the harder they fought to surface. They grew, spreading like a crack in the foundation of our marriage. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. Everything between us began to shift. It was subtle at first. Our conversations grew shorter. The warmth in her voice when she spoke to me seemed to fade. It wasn't that we were fighting. It was worse than that. We were simply disconnecting. She had made a decision for herself. And in doing so, she had shut me out. I started to notice how much time she spent with her best friend. They had always been close, but now it felt different. They were constantly texting, making plans, meeting up. I'd come home to find her on the phone, fully engaged, her voice filled with excitement. But when she spoke to me, it was different, like I was just another item on her to-do list, something to check off. A few times, I almost convinced myself that this was temporary, that things would go back to normal. But deep down, I already knew nothing would ever be the same, drifting further apart. I tried bringing it up, but she brushed me off. You're overthinking things, she said when I mentioned how distant she seemed. But I wasn't imagining it. I knew what distance felt like. It wasn't just about words or actions. It was about presence. And hers was no longer with me. Then came the appointments. She never invited me. She went alone or with her best friend. It was as if I had been completely shut out, reduced to nothing more than a spectator in my own marriage. One evening, she came home, her face glowing with excitement, more animated than I had seen her in months. They confirmed everything, she said, setting her bag down. The doctors said we're ready to start the process. That word, we, it hit harder than I expected. There was no we in this. There was her. There was her friend. And then there was me, watching from the sidelines as it all unfolded. I tried to ask how she was feeling, whether she had any concerns, if she was nervous about what came next. But she barely entertained the conversation before shifting to something else. It became painfully clear. Her excitement wasn't just about the surrogacy. It was about finding a purpose outside of our marriage. She was so consumed with what she was doing for her friend that she had stopped caring about what was happening between us. The walls were closing in, and I felt it. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was tangible. That night, I lay in bed knowing something had changed. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was something we wouldn't recover from. A marriage in name only. The weeks that followed blur together. Wake up, go to work, come home to a stranger. That's what she had become to me. Someone I barely recognized. Someone who didn't seem to notice how much I was slipping away. And maybe that was the hardest part, how little it seemed to matter to her. I kept telling myself I needed to talk to her again, to make one final effort to salvage whatever we had left. But every time I opened my mouth, I hesitated, because deep down I already knew the answer. Then one night, it finally happened. She walked through the door, holding a stack of paperwork. I hadn't even known she had an appointment that day. I watched as she tossed the papers onto the kitchen counter, acting like it was just another errand, another step in her plan. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You didn't think to tell me you had an appointment today? She barely looked up as she kicked off her shoes. It was just a routine check, nothing major. That's not the point, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, already irritated. Then what is the point? Why are you making this an issue? I shook my head. Because you've made it clear that none of this involves me. You don't even try to pretend anymore. That got her attention. She turned to face me, arms folded. I told you from the start, this was my decision. You act like I owe you something just because I made a choice that doesn't revolve around you. My fists clenched at my sides. That's not what this is about, and you know it. Then what is it about? She shot back. I exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. It's about the fact that you don't care what this is doing to us. Her expression hardened. I do care, she said. But I also know this is important, and I'm not going to change my mind just because you're uncomfortable. I let her words settle between us, their weight suffocating. This isn't just about discomfort. I said, my voice quieter now. It's about respect, about trust, about a marriage that's supposed to be a partnership. But somehow, only one of us gets to make decisions. She scoffed. So what? You expect me to just give this up because you don't like it? That's not how this works. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't betrayed. I was just done. No, I said, my voice firm. That's not how this works. And I think we both know that. For the first time, something shifted in her expression, but it wasn't regret. It wasn't concern. It was just annoyance, like I was making things harder than they needed to be. That was the moment I knew. There was nothing left to fight for. The final choice. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I woke up earlier than usual, moving quietly as I got dressed. She barely stirred. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, regret. But there was nothing, just an overwhelming certainty that it was time to walk away. A final goodbye. I couldn't stay another second. Without a word, I walked out the door, not to clear my head, not to take a breather, but to take the first real step toward leaving it all behind. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't done in anger. It was simply the only choice left. For weeks, months, I had watched our marriage crumble, trying to hold the pieces together alone. But last night had made one thing clear. She wasn't interested in fixing anything. By the time I returned that evening, I had already spoken to a lawyer. The wheels were in motion. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up. No greeting, no curiosity about where I'd been. Just another night where I was an afterthought. I set my keys on the counter. We need to talk. She sighed, barely glancing up. About what? I didn't hesitate. I'm leaving. That got her attention. She frowned, setting her phone down. What do you mean? I exhaled, keeping my voice even. I mean, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Her eyes narrowed. You're overreacting. There was again the same dismissive tone, the same refusal to acknowledge how much she had pushed me away. I shook my head. No, I'm done. She blinked, as if only now realizing I was serious. So that's it? You're just walking away? I let out a dry laugh, one without humor, without warmth. I should have walked away a long time ago. She stared at me, expression unreadable. I expected anger, maybe an argument, but instead, she just shrugged. So you're giving up on our marriage because you didn't get your way? That was all I needed to hear. Even at the end, she didn't get it. She never had. This was never about getting my way. It was about respect, about trust, about a relationship that was supposed to be a partnership, but had become something else entirely. I'm not the one who gave up, I said simply. She didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, watching as I walked out the door. And this time, I didn't look back. Starting over, I left without hesitation, without doubt. For so long, I had convinced myself I needed to stay, that I had to find a way to fix what was broken. But the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. She had made her choices, and now I had made mine. I stayed in a hotel for a few days, taking time to sit with the reality of it all. I didn't rush to find a new place or bury myself in distractions. I wasn't in shock. I wasn't waiting for some overwhelming wave of emotion to hit me. I just felt done. She never reached out. No calls. No texts. Nothing. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. When the divorce papers were finally served, I got the confirmation I had been expecting. She wasn't going to fight it. No pleading. No attempts to change my mind. Just a quiet acceptance that this was happening. It was almost laughable. For so long, I had worried, wondered if she would paint me as a villain, if she would twist the story to make it seem like I was the selfish one. But in the end, she let me go just as easily as she had shut me out. And that was what hurt the most. Not the arguments, not the final conversation, but the realization that I had been so easy to replace. A new beginning. I moved into a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it felt more like home than our house ever had. I expected to miss her, to feel the weight of loneliness settle in. But instead, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, the burden was gone, and I finally understood why. I had been alone long, before I ever left. People asked questions. Friends, family, all looking for answers. I kept it simple. We wanted different things. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. It was enough. Some said I should have tried harder. That marriage was about compromise. But that was the problem. Compromise only works when both people are willing to meet halfway. I had been the only one fighting to hold things together. And you can't save something when the other person doesn't care if it falls apart. She moved on. Maybe she already had before I even left. Either way, I didn't waste time thinking about her. She had made her priorities clear. And for the first time in a long time, I had made myself priority. I walked away without regret. Not because it didn't hurt. Not because it was easy. But because it was necessary. And that was enough. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps more than you know. I've picked 2 other videos I think you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll see you in the next story. Take care.